For most of my life, I have watched people work very hard to solve the wrong money problem. They think the problem is income. They think the answer is a bigger paycheck. They think that once they reach the next number, life will finally calm down. I do not think that is what usually happens. What usually happens is something more subtle and more dangerous. Income rises, expectations rise faster. Fixed costs expand. The emotional standard for what feels normal drifts upward, and the person who once thought an extra $1,000 a month would change everything discovers that it changed very little, because the structure around his life expanded to consume it. That is one of the most important lessons I know about money. More income is not the same thing as more safety. And a lot of people live their entire lives without learning the difference. The source material says this in plain language, and I think it gets it right. It argues that the biggest problems people have with money are less about intelligence and more about behavior expectations, social comparison, and whether they can build the habits that create independence. It also makes the point that happiness is strongly connected to the gap between what you have and what you expect. That gap, once it widens, can swallow almost any raise. Payfalasite Fayturn. Payfalasite Fayturn Fayfil Ua. When I was younger, I misunderstood this too. Like many people, I assumed that financial progress would be easy to recognize. More money would simply feel better. A bigger cushion would automatically produce calm. But money does not work that way if you do not control the rest of the machinery. If your desires expand every time your resources expand, then progress becomes very difficult to feel. You may be moving forward in arithmetic and backward in peace of mind at the same time. That is why I have long believed that one of the most useful questions in finance is not how much money do you make. It is this: how much life does your money now require to sustain? That is a much deeper question. A person who earns a great deal but has built a high-maintenance life may have very little room. He has rent or mortgage payments that cannot easily shrink, habits that feel non-negotiable, social expectations that have become fixed, subscriptions, travel standards, school choices, dining patterns, identities tied to visible success, and all the invisible obligations that attach themselves to a certain lifestyle once it has been normalized. He may make far more than he once dreamed of making, but he cannot breathe. He must keep feeding the machine. Another person may earn less and yet have much more room because he asked a different question. He did not ask how much can I now afford. He asked how much of this income can be converted into independence. That difference is everything. The source text makes a wonderful distinction here between being rich and being wealthy. Rich in that frame is the ability to spend. Wealthy is the ownership of savings and investments that are not currently being spent and therefore buy independence. That is one of the cleanest and most useful definitions in personal finance because it cuts through so much confusion. A person who can buy things is not necessarily secure. A person who owns unspent assets may be far stronger than he looks. Payfalasite Fayturn Fayfayu. I have never cared much about looking rich. I care a great deal about being independent. Those are not the same goal. A person can look rich and still be highly dependent. He may depend on his employer, on the next client, on the next bonus, on market staying favorable, on no health surprises, on no job disruption, on no family emergency, on no break in the chain of income that supports his obligations. That is not real strength. That is a polished form of fragility. A person can look modest and be enormously strong. He may have savings, low fixed costs, room in the budget, few claims on future income time, optionality, the capacity to leave a job he hates, the ability to survive a bad year, the confidence to say no to a bad deal. The mental quiet that comes from knowing a surprise will wound him less than it used to. That is wealth. That is what money is supposed to do. Not impress the crowd, reduce the degree to which the crowd controls you, better dinners, newer cars, more visible evidence that things are going well. But the deeper purpose of money is control. Control over your time, control over your reactions, control over what happens when life does what life always does, which is surprise you. The source material says something close to this when it explains savings as a form of ownership over your future. Every dollar of savings, it says, is a piece of your future that you control, while every dollar of debt is a piece of your future that belongs to somebody else. I think that is exactly the right way to describe it. Savings are not just deferred spending, they are reclaimed control. When you view money this way, saving feels very different. Most people are taught to think of saving as delayed gratification. You deny yourself something now so that one day you can have something later. There is some truth in that, but I think it misses the best part of saving. Saving buys you something immediately. It buys margin. It buys lower fear. It buys the ability to absorb surprise. It buys a little bit of independence right now, not only years from now. That is why even small amounts matter. The source text is very strong on this point. It insists that anything is better than nothing, and that saving $5, $10, $20, though unimpressive to outsiders, can still matter enormously because it begins changing the relationship between the person and the future. It also points out that financial independence exists on a spectrum, not as a black and white threshold. That is a very healthy idea. People dismiss small progress because they worship dramatic progress, but small progress is where identity changes begin. Paycheck, pay turn, paycheck, pay turn, pay. I remember this well from my own life. There is a moment, often when you are young or financially fragile, when even a small savings balance feels extraordinary. Not because the number itself is large, but because the meaning is large. It means there is a meal in the future that is already paid for. A bill that can be handled, a delay that can be tolerated, a small emergency that no longer becomes total panic. That psychological shift is not trivial. It is the first taste of financial independence. People who have never felt that often underestimate it. People who have felt it never fully forget it. This is why I think one of the costliest mistakes people make is waiting until they have enough to save. They imagine savings as something adults with extra room do after the real financial work has already been solved. I think the opposite is true. Saving is the thing that starts solving the real financial problem. It is how room gets created in the first place. Now, I do not mean to sound naive. There are people under real strain. Housing is expensive, healthcare is expensive, children are expensive, wages are uneven. The economy has become punishing in ways that many polite commentators like to understate. I do not dismiss any of that. If someone tells me he can barely pay his bills, I do not think my job is to lecture him as though he were merely being careless. The source material handles this well too. It goes out of its way to say that people in that position should not feel shame and that they are not alone. I think that matters. Shame is not a financial plan. Guilt rarely produces sound behavior for long. People improve when they feel agency, not when they feel publicly defective. Paycheck, pay turn, pay, but compassion should not become vagueness. If your finances are weak, the answer is still clarity. How much is coming in? How much is going out? Where is it going? What categories are quietly expanding? What purchases are solving real problems? What purchases are performances? What purchases are boredom management? What purchases are stress relief? What purchases are social comparison disguised as necessity? The source text makes this point bluntly. A great many people, it says, do not really know what they make or what they spend. They are not evil or stupid. They are disconnected. They are living in a fog. And the first step is to stop living in the fog. That is excellent advice. In money, vagueness is expensive. Paycheck, pay turn, pay. You cannot control what you refuse to face. This is why the first stage of financial maturity often looks boring from the outside. It is not stock picking. It is not finding some secret side hustle. It is not timing macro cycles. It is looking directly at your own cash flow and refusing to lie to yourself about what is happening there. Clarity is much more powerful than cleverness at the beginning. Then comes the next step. Treat savings as an expense, not as the leftover category, not as whatever happens to survive after every convenience, indulgence, and impulse has taken a turn. An expense, this is one of the simplest and most useful ideas in the source text. It suggests a 10% rule as a rough starting discipline, and more importantly, it says to save by default, not when convenient. I think that is exactly right. The person who waits until the end of the month to see what remains will usually discover that not much remains. The person who saves first, even modestly, is making a structural decision about what matters. Paycheck, pay turn, pay, and once you make that decision, automation becomes your ally. I am a great admirer of systems that reduce reliance on mood. Human beings are flawed, emotional, biased, socially pressured creatures. That is not an insult. It is simply a fact. So whenever good behavior can be turned into automatic behavior, the odds improve. If money moves to savings or investment the moment a paycheck lands, before your preferences and insecurities have had time to negotiate with you, then the right thing starts happening without demanding that you feel noble every 2 weeks. That matters enormously. The source material says this plainly as well. The more you can take behavior out of the system and replace it with automation, the better you are likely to do over time. That is a profound point because so much failed financial planning assumes a person will remain perpetually motivated. He will not. Structure must do the work that motivation cannot sustain. Fayfile site Fayturn, Fayfile Fay. Another lesson buried in the source text that I strongly agree with is that life is more fragile than most people want to admit. Careers are fragile, health is fragile, families are fragile, economies are fragile, geopolitics is fragile. In a world where all of that uncertainty exists, savings stop looking optional and start looking mandatory. Not because everyone needs to become an ascetic, because uncertainty is the permanent condition. Fayfile site, Fayturn, Fayfile. This is one reason I dislike financial plans that assume smoothness. Life is not smooth. The job may disappear. The marriage may break. The market may fall right when you hoped it would rise. A parent may get sick. A child may need help. A city may become unaffordable. Your own energy may change. The question is not whether surprise is coming. The question is whether your financial structure has any room for surprise when it does. Savings are that room, and here is a subtle point most people miss. Savings matter not only because they pay bills in a crisis, they matter because they change the way you think before the crisis arrives. A person with no cushion often lives in reaction mode. Every inconvenience feels like an alarm. Every request from a boss feels harder to resist. Every bad option feels slightly more mandatory. Every risk, even a smart risk, looks too dangerous. The person becomes cautious in bad ways and reckless in others because there is no room for thoughtful movement. A person with savings begins to behave differently long before any emergency appears. He negotiates differently. He sleeps differently. He carries himself differently. He is not rich yet, perhaps, but he is harder to corner. That is an enormous advantage in life. This is why I say margin is emotional as much as financial. The source text hints at this when it describes the feeling of having $5,000 saved for the first time and how much that sum changed the emotional experience of money. I think that is exactly right. Money changes before the number gets huge. It changes when the person finally feels the future is not entirely unsecured. Fayfile site Fayturn, Fay to Fay at a certain point. This all leads to a bigger question. What are you optimizing for? That is one of the greatest questions in finance. Not everybody should optimize for the same thing. Some people should optimize for maximum growth, some for flexibility, some for stability, some for the ability to walk away, some for the ability to work less, some for the ability to help other people. If you assume the only rational answer is to maximize the highest possible return, you are making a philosophical error before you even begin. Personal finance is personal because the life being financed is personal. One person can endure volatility easily. Another cannot. One wants to retire early. Another loves his work. One values optionality above all. Another values predictability. These are not flaws, they are realities. The source material touches this in a useful way. It argues that the point of money is not abstract bragging rights, but a better life, better sleep, and greater independence. I think that is the correct order of importance. If a strategy looks excellent on paper but makes your actual life feel unstable or miserable, it is not excellent for you. Fayfile site Fayturn, Fayfile Fay. This becomes especially important in investing. People love to imagine investing success as a function of intelligence. Perhaps if they were only a bit smarter, a bit more informed, a bit more connected, a bit more mathematically gifted, then the market would finally open its riches to them. I have never thought that was the main divider. The main divider is temperament. Can you be patient? Can you let compounding look boring for a long time? Can you tolerate uncertainty without demanding constant reassurance? Can you live through the fee that the market charges for long-term returns? The source text describes this beautifully. It says the fee for doing well in investing is not merely the broker's commission. The real fee is volatility and uncertainty. That is the cost of admission. I think that is one of the best descriptions of investing ever offered to ordinary people. Fayfile site Fayturn, Fayfi. The market historically has rewarded patience, but patience feels expensive while you are paying for it. That is why so few people hold it long enough. A person who wants certainty can always buy certainty. A savings account offers that kind of comfort. Very low volatility, very predictable. And In exchange for that certainty, the return is lower. That is not a crime. It is a trade. A person who wants the higher long-term return of ownership in productive businesses must pay a different fee. He must endure uncertainty and not know exactly when the reward will arrive. The source text makes this explicit too. Over 10 or 20 years, history suggests the cost of that uncertainty has been worth paying. But worth paying is not the same thing as emotionally easy. Payphilosite, payturn, payfi. This is why patience is not a slogan. It is a skill, and it is also why compounding is so underappreciated. Compounding sounds simple enough. Money earns returns, and then those returns earn returns, and over a long enough period, the process becomes extraordinary. The mathematics are easy to explain. The human experience is harder because compounding is unimpressive for a long time. Then, late in the process, it begins to look magical. Outsiders see the late magic and forget the long boredom that created it. The source text reminds readers that almost all of Buffett's net worth came after age 60. That fact should be studied more carefully than it usually is. It does not merely prove the power of investing. It proves the power of duration. Great financial outcomes are often ordinary behavior held for an extraordinary length of time. Payphilosite, payturn, payphile, pay. That is one reason jealousy is so expensive. Jealousy destroys duration. Jealousy makes you impatient. It makes you think you are behind. It makes you chase hotter things, faster things, louder things, riskier things. It makes you disrespect slow progress, even though slow progress is exactly how most durable wealth is built. I have more respect for the patient saver and the patient investor than for the flashy one who cannot sit still. Because in finance, sitting still is often doing more work than people realize. Now let me come to a principle that sounds almost too simple. Enough, I think. Enough is one of the most radical and useful words in all of finance. More is easy to understand. More salary, more square footage, more returns, more luxury, more status. Enough is harder because enough requires self-definition. It asks you to decide what kind of life is sufficient, what level of material comfort is truly useful, and when a rise in expectations stops improving your life and starts quietly owning it. The source text says desiring less can improve your well-being as much as earning more. That is exactly right. If you want less in order to feel whole, your resources become more powerful without changing their size. If you need less to be content, your savings stretch farther, your dependence drops, your bargaining power rises, your stress often falls. That is a tremendous advantage. Payphilosite, payturn, payphile. This is one of the least understood forms of wealth. A person who needs little to be content has a superpower. The source text says this plainly too. If one person needs $10,000 a month to feel happy, while another needs only $1,000, the second person's savings are doing far more real work. I think that is one of the strongest insights in the entire document, because it turns wealth from a pure accumulation game into a ratio between resources and expectations. Payphilosite, payturn, pay that ratio matters more than almost every status symbol ever purchased. It determines whether you feel pressure or peace. It determines whether savings feel trivial or transformative. It determines whether a modest portfolio feels insulting or liberating. It determines whether a raise improves your life or merely funds a more elaborate trap. This is why contentment is not passivity. It is financial intelligence. It does not mean you stop aspiring. It means your aspirations stop sabotaging your peace. You can still want to work hard, earn more, invest more, and build more, while also refusing to let more become the only thing that feels acceptable. That is a very healthy tension. Without it, people become trapped in endless escalation. With it, money begins serving life instead of replacing it. So if I had to reduce all of this to one view, it would be this. The goal is not simply to make more. The goal is to turn what you make into independence. That means lower required maintenance. It means visible clarity around cash flow. It means automatic saving. It means patience in investing. It means respect for volatility if you want the reward on the other side of it. It means learning the difference between rich and wealthy. And it means deciding, long before the world decides for you, what enough looks like in your own life. Because once you know what enough is, money stops being only a contest. It starts becoming a tool for breathing room, a tool for resilience, a tool for choice, a tool for quiet, a tool for saying no, and ultimately, a tool for building a life that feels steadier on the inside than it may ever look from the outside. That, in my experience, is the kind of wealth worth having.